Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is our TNA show for the week. Let's jump right into it. First off, we're going to go to the so-so segments. Basically, the stuff that wasn't bad, wasn't good, was just kind of there. And we're going to start with the opening promo segment with Dixie Carter, Ethan Carter III, Rockstar Spud, Rhino, Gene Snitsky, and the man formerly known as Ezekiel Jackson, now going by his real name, Rick Lon. To me, it just was basically it set up a theme for the night where you were trying to get the fans to chant ECW at a TNA show, which is cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's no bigger ECW fan than me, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. However, and it came this came to me reading a interview with Paul Heyman, who, as many of you know, is the genius behind ECW. Now, Paul said, and I'm not going to say the exact, it's not going to be the exact quote, but to paraphrase what he said, basically, it's done, let it go. It died in 2001. You're asking your fans to cheer for a company that's been long gone at this point, 13 years, instead of your company, which is still going and could be going strong. I thought he made an excellent point with that. I mean, as much as I love seeing the ECW guys, as much as I love the ECW chant, and the fact that it keeps that alive, he's 100% right. By them doing this, it kind of makes you look at, and it's the thing that's long been a problem with TNA, is you kind of look at it as castaways from other people's shows, either from WWE, WCW, ECW. You don't look at TNA really as its own entity. And it's kind of what the chant does, in my opinion. But, anyway, moving forward to some other things, I don't want to get in a big, long discussion about that, because that'll take up a whole series of videos. We have the championship match, Austin Aries versus Bobby Lashley. Now, this went on last on the show. However, I just don't think the two stylistically clicked. Austin Aries is a guy I really like. Lashley, he could stay or he could go. I'm not a fan. I don't hate him. If he's in a great match, I give him his due. This one, it wasn't a bad match. It didn't click, in my opinion. Lashley picks up the win, thus for making Aries cash in. Fail, which is good. You have to have a failed cash in so they're not 100%. That way, there's, you have that, should I cash in or should I not? Because next year it's going to come to the fact where they go, okay, well, he cashed in and he won, but he cashed in and he lost. So you have that to play off of each other, which I thought was a cool aspect of it to do that, but I just didn't think the match connected, in my opinion. Next up, our bad portion of the night. Now, I'm probably going to get in a little further in depth with this than I normally do with any singular thing, especially something that was a coming preview. And what I want to say is, after the show, after the main event, we get a teaser promo for next week. And it tells you that Bully Ray is going to put Dixie Carter through the table. Just flat out tells you what's going to happen next week. Now, their hope is that you're going to tune in because you want to see that. The reality is, the video of that's already online. If you want to see that, you can see that. They should be teasing this instead of flat out telling. They should be saying, tune in next week to see if Bully Ray finally gets Dixie Carter. You see the difference? If he doesn't get her next week, you go, okay, well, when's he going to get her? But you keep tuning in if that's what you want to, if you're waiting for, if you're a fan that's waiting to see Bully Ray put Dixie Carter through a table, you keep tuning in to see that, and you keep seeing her getting away, which is awesome, great build-up. Giving away a fact of one of your biggest angles you got going a week before the show, in my opinion, does the opposite effect of what you want it to do. It causes more people to go, okay, I know what's going to go on. I don't really need to watch that show. I can miss that. Now, we all know that TNA is taped. You can read the spoilers, which is another issue for another day. But I'll put it to you like this. On a show where I know the outcomes, like let's say I read the spoilers for TNA or SmackDown or whatever it may be, a taped TV show, myself, I'm more inclined to DVR that show and watch it the next day or the day after or whenever I get an opportunity than I am to watch the show as it airs, which brings you the initial rating, which helps you boost your sales. For the simple fact of, if I know person A beats person B, Bully Ray puts Dixie through the table, okay, now when I watch it, that surprise is gone. And that's what I watch wrestling for, the surprise. It's one of the big draws in wrestling. Now, another thing I wanted to mention on this, and the timing of this is god-awful. If you live here in America like I do, you know that right now, if you turn on SportsCenter or any sports program, over the last 2 weeks, the hot topic story, the main story on every show, every little talk show they have, every SportsCenter, every Pardon the Interruption, Behind the Lines, whatever, is Ray Rice hitting his wife. Ray Rice is an NFL player, for those of you out of America that aren't familiar with this story. Basically, he hit his wife in a hotel. It was caught on a security camera, her unconscious on the floor and him picking her up. The NFL suspended Ray Rice for 2 games. Huge uproar because someone that smokes a little bit of weed gets a 4-game suspension. However, beating your wife gets 2. Big uproar about this huge thing. I myself think that you should never ever hit a woman. I think it's one of the things that should never be done. You know, to me, it's right up there with rape and murder. I think hitting a woman is in that category. Now, that being said, there's a lot of talk of man-on-woman violence going on, spurning from this issue. What are you promoting for your show? A man, a 300-pound man, putting a 150-pound, 130-pound, whatever she may be, I'm not good with that. Let's say a 130-pound woman, 300-pound man, his goal is to put this woman through a table. Now, with all the Ray Rice stuff going on and the talk on all your sports shows, which reminds you, the same demographic that watches SportsCenter or watches NFL recap shows or whatever you may be is the demographic that watches wrestling. So therefore, you're telling this demographic that's seeing all week this outrage and fury over Ray Rice getting a light suspension over such a heinous crime, now you want them to be excited about a guy putting a woman through a table. You see where I'm going here, folks? The timing on this is absolutely horrible. I personally, if I was in charge, I wouldn't have mentioned it or cut the segment altogether. just because of what's going on in the rest of the country. And I know it's a wrestling show, it's all part of a show, but you have to be a little bit sensitive to what goes on in the real world. You can't have, and this is going to be a terrible example, but you can't have something like September 11th happen, and then the next week you come out on a wrestling show with a guy dressed up like Osama bin Laden blowing up the stage. You just can't do it. Same kind of thing. You can't have a guy putting a woman through a table within a week or two of a huge scandal with a man that beat his wife. But anyway, that's basically my thoughts on that. And I'm sorry if I got a little bit too deep and a little bit too political, but to me, it's an issue that I think they should have avoided. Now we're going to go a little bit lighter now, so lighten the mood. Get back to what you guys are used to with our show. Question of the week. Our question of the week from last week is, what now closed promotion was your favorite, or dead promotion was your favorite? First is from our friend Zombies40. Even though I really like ECW doing all those crazy brutal matches, WCW had the Cruiserweights, which had some amazing wrestlers, had some awesome matches, so I would side with WCW a bit more than ECW. Fair assessment. WCW was a little bit more slick, a little more polished. They did bring in a lot of the Cruiserweights. Suffice to say, most of them came through ECW, but that's a different argument for a different day. But, you know, I could see where there are a lot of people that are WCW fans that had a different style. Next is from our friend Benjamin Me19. Hey Heel Heat, for this week's question of the week, my favorite defunct companies were WCW and ECW. I think it's good for the wrestlers to always have somewhere else to go if it doesn't work out in the WWE. It's good for the fans because competing companies always have to put up better shows. I think WCW was good competition, especially between 96 and 98. And I was sad to see ECW go because they had a potential to compete but didn't have the money. I'd really like to see TNA become the next major competitor. I agree. I'd love to see TNA be on a level where it's considered on the same footing as even WCW was. Mine, of course, is ECW. In my opinion, the most revolutionary company in the wrestling history, in the history of the wrestling business. They changed the landscape of wrestling. Good or bad, what we see now is nothing like what we seen in the 1980s and the early 1990s before ECW came and switched everything. They made the stories more realistic. They made the violence more realistic. They introduced cruiserweights to America. They introduced wrestling back to America. They had hour-long wrestling matches, not just violent, bloody bloodbaths. But some of the greatest wrestlers of the last half century walked through the doors of ECW. Guys like Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Chris Candido, Lance Storm, list goes on and on. Just in my opinion, I don't think anything in wrestling will ever top ECW, but I'm waiting to see something try. Now, coming off of that, we're going to go to our question of the week for this week. If you've noticed over the past few weeks when they were taped in New York City, and even when they did their little things in Allentown, Pennsylvania, the crowds were extremely hot, and it added to the excitement of the show. My question is, should TNA only show impacts from these hot areas? Got areas like New York, Chicago, even Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Atlanta, areas where wrestling has a strong foothold and the crowds are always hot. Toronto is another good example. North Carolina, Charlotte. good examples of areas where there's a want and a need and a rabid fan base for professional wrestling. My question is, should TNA stay in these towns for their shows so it gives their show a better appeal when you're watching it? Now, can they do tours of other towns? Can they go to Des Moines, Iowa, Houston, Texas, wherever you may be? And I'm not knocking those towns at all. It's not anything bad about them. I'm sure they draw great crowds and people come. But as you watch, you see that certain shows in certain areas just get a better reaction. A New York City show gets a better reaction than the Tupelo, Mississippi show. You might make the same amount of money, but it comes off better on television in New York City. So the question is, should they stay in the hot towns for TV purposes? Coming off of that, we're going to go into our good portions of the week. First up, the Hardy Boys versus the Wolves in a Dream Tag Team match. Thought it was a good match. Thought it could have had a little bit more time. Wolves came out on top, which I'm glad to see they didn't do the let's give the Hardys the belts the first night back. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I thought they left a little bit more so they could have a rematch at some point. But all in all, a good match. Next up is our first of 3 qualifiers for the next week's 3-way for the vacant X Division title. We got Zima Ion versus Manic versus Loki. Loki picks up the win. Pretty dominant faction. I hope he's someone to keep on a more permanent basis. I'm a fan of Loki. I think he brings a certain style, a certain hard-hitting, martial arts-based toughness that carries over well into the ring. I think he's a great addition. Plus, he has so much history with the company that it's a no-brainer to keep him. Next up, we have James Storm talk about what he did to the Great Muta, which brings out Sonata, who's going up in the second 3-way against Brian Cage and Crazy Steve. I thought this was good. It's funny how they promoted the Menagerie so heavily, and now they're being used as basically an enhancement talent. I thought Sonata picking up the win was good, especially with the recent heel turn. I thought it helps add to his character. Now next up, we had our second promo of the week, which was Team 3D and Tommy Dreamer coming out to respond to what had happened earlier and accept the challenge from Ethan Carter and his group. So we'll see next week Team 3D, Tommy Dreamer, and a surprise partner going on a 4-on-4 elimination match with Rockstar Spud, Rhino, Rick Lon, and Gene Snitsky. So, good little thing. And of course, this EC3's group came out at the end. Good little interaction set up, hype for a match next week. Which is like going back to what I said about the spoiler. You hype what you're going to do, you don't tell them exactly what you're going to do. You notice I didn't say who this, at the end of the show, it didn't leave a disclaimer going, here's who the special guest will be. No, because they want you to tune in and go, who's going to be the surprise? Is it going to be New Jack? Is it going to be Sandman? Is it going to be Shane Douglas? Sabu? The options are limitless. Steve Corino? Anybody. There's a whole ton of people it could potentially be. And it leaves the door open. It leaves you to think about that. And you go, oh, I hope it's Steve Corino. He's one of my favorites. I'm going to tune in to see if Steve Corino shows up. Or is it Just Incredible? I hate Just Incredible. I hope it's not him. I'm going to tune in. They better not have Just Incredible. Basically, not my personal opinions, but just saying the scenarios that go through your head of all the opportunities that could be. And last but not least, I think this was my favorite match of the night. Samoa Joe versus Tigre Uno versus Homicide. The last of the 3 ways. Thought it was cool that all three had a guy that's not necessarily under TNA contract, low key, Brian Cage and Homicide. I'd love to see Homicide back in the company. I think his character is so different and so unique that he could be a huge asset to them. I love the fact that Samoa Joe got the win. X Division Samoa Joe is where he basically turned himself into a TNA legend, in my opinion. But all in all, a great match. My favorite of the night, personally. Sets up the three-way for next week. Low Key versus Sonata versus Samoa Joe, which should be an awesome match. Now, coming off of that, we're going to go into our ratings for the week. If you've seen the show before, you know we have a 1 to 5 scale. 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. 1's a Dixie Carter, 2's a Rockstar Spud, 3's a Gunner, 4's a James Storm, 5's a Bobby Roode. Now, if I take the next week's spoiler promo out, I'd give this show a 4, a James Storm. If I put that promo in, how disappointed that made me, and how much of a mistake I thought it was, I drop it down to a 3, a Gunner. In my opinion, with that in there, that's how much of a knock it took. A 30-second promo made a show that was good go to okay. Just in my opinion. So I give the show a 3. I give it a Gunner. Overall, good show. Not great. The show itself was solid. Very solid. Coming off of 2 excellent shows, this was good. I mean, it was down a bit, but it didn't go all the way down to where it was a terrible show. The after show promo, disappointing at best. But basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another episode of Heel Heat.